fact, they stored hundreds of tortoises in the bowels of the beagle and ate the data on the way home and threw the carapaces overboard. If you're an evolutionist, you need to record, because of the principle of adaptive radiation, you need to record where all these different specimens came from. So, but later, because of the sort of evil nature of the predator-prey relationships, the death of his daughter, and other things, he lost his religiosity and never wrote about it publicly, ever. We know what his beliefs were, however, from private letters. In 1879, just 3 years before he died, Darwin finally expressed his beliefs. In my most extreme fluctuations, I've never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of God. I think that generally, and more as I grow older, but not always, that an agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. Here he's using Huxley's meaning that it's not that we're waiting for more data. It could go this way, it could go that way. It's that there'll never be any data. There'll never be some experiment. Science can't adjudicate the problem, just simply without, it's beyond the realm of science. That's what Huxley meant, and that's what Darwin means here. A year later, Darwin clarified his thinking. The British socialist Edward Aveling had compiled a volume entitled The Student's Darwin, on the implications of evolutionary theory for religious thought. And Aveling wanted Darwin's endorsement, like a little blurb on the back, that you get from like that. The book had a militant, anti-religious flavor and unabashedly radical atheist tone that Darwin disdained, and he declined the request, elaborating his reason with his usual flair for quotable maxims. Quote, "It appears to me, whether rightly or wrongly, that direct arguments against Christianity and theism produce hardly any effect on the public, and freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds, which follows from the advance of science. It has, therefore, always been my object to avoid writing on religion, and I have confined myself to science." He then appended an additional hint about a personal motive, noting, quote, "I may, however, have been unduly biased by the pain which would have given some members of my family if I aided in any direct attacks on religion." Darwin's wife, Emma, was a deeply religious woman, and out of respect for her, he kept the public side of his religious skepticism in check, an admirable feat of self-discipline by a man of high moral character. So in that sense, we see Darwin chose as his goal domestic tranquility, I suppose, or respect out of his love for his wife, versus doing something that would largely have no effect in any case, that is, attack religion and get in people's faces. And so it depends on that, on what your purposes are. And finally, a couple final comments. There's so much to say on this subject, and I guess we will for the next several weeks, but when you talk about religion, I think it's good if we define what it is we mean when we're talking about that. It's such a huge subject, the topic of why are people religious or not. It can't be answered unless you define what it is you're talking about. And so, I mean, faith, belief in God, which aspects of religion? Obviously, religiously driven terrorists, bad. But what about the hundreds of millions, even perhaps over $1 billion raised just for Katrina by religions? Religion did way more than certainly the government did. And there are no scientific organizations rushing to help the victims of Katrina, of course, because that's not what science does. So are you talking about that when you're talking about religion? What exactly are we talking about? So in behavioral science and psychology, when you run an experiment, you have to have a criteria, some objective definition of what it is you're measuring when you're trying to measure something in a very specific way, rather than just something global, which we tend to do when we talk about religion. I think part of the problem in the approach, if your goal is to, I guess, talk people out of their religion, or at least get them to embrace science and the liberal values. Let's say your goal, like our goal at the Skeptic Society, is to spread liberal democracy, reason, rationality in as many places as possible. That's sort of our rough goal. And science is the best, science and reason we think is the best tool for doing that. If you give a person a choice between, say, Darwin and the theory of evolution, in particular in science in general, and his religion, which for those of us who are not religion, we think of as, not religious, we think of as, oh, it's these silly beliefs about the cracker becomes the body and the resurrection, and this is all baloney. Surely anybody would give up this nonsense for this grand science stuff. I mean, the Hubble Space Telescope photographs of the expanding universe. I mean, this is terrific. How can you accept the silly old nonsense? Because that's not why people are religious. What you're really asking them to do is give up their family, their friends, their social circle, their community, their social life, virtually every aspect of your life. Think of the scale. Darwin and science over here, and my family, my friends, my social circle, the bowling league, everybody I work with, everybody in the community I know. You want me to give up that? Forget it. I'm not going to do it. They won't even get past the first paragraph of your book because they're not interested in giving all that stuff up. So there has to be another way around it. And the approach I've taken here, again, it's not just making nice just to make for nice sake. It's to accomplish a goal. That is, you don't have to give up anything. You can embrace all of the findings of science. If you believe that God is eternal, what difference does it make whether he did it 6,000 years ago or 6 billion years ago? It's just 6 zeros, 9 zeros, 12 zeros, 100 zeros. If you're eternal, it doesn't matter. I've tried this. These are approaches I've tried on my Christian friends, and so far it works pretty well. And if you believe God is the creator of all things and he's omniscient, omnipotent, what difference does it make how he did it? You know, spoken word, lightning bolt out of the finger, natural selection, gravity. I mean, nobody uses this argument anymore. I'm amazed that intelligent design creationists haven't found this quote from Isaac Newton. At the end of his Principia Mathematica, Newton couldn't figure out why the planets are all in the plane of the ecliptic, all going in the same direction, spinning in the same direction. So he wrote, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." Why doesn't anybody make that argument anymore? Because we now have a perfectly good theory about how the planetary systems are formed. And so now what believers say is, well, yeah, of course, but that's the way God creates solar systems. He gets condensing clouds of hydrogen gas and gravity and so on. That's how he did it. Why can't you just say God used evolution to create the moral sentiments? That's where we get the moral law that C.S. Lewis talks about that Francis Collins leans so heavily on. Why not just say, well, God used evolution. That's the way he did it. At some point, of course, my really militant atheist friends who really want to push the ontological question, yeah, but what place for God then? Well, it comes down to this, that if God is operating in the world, then it's legitimate for us to ask how he's doing it. That is, can we measure it or something like that? So the only place for God really is beyond space and time. That is, beyond the natural world. So there can be no conflict. It has to be separate worlds. There can be no conflict. A is A cannot be non-A. The natural cannot be the supernatural. If God is entering into our world, then he's really just part of the world, and therefore part of science, and therefore part of the natural world. And if he's not, then he's outside of it, and that's how you keep them separate. What you decide to do with that when you engage a believer, it depends on your goals. And I think that's where it comes down to, I think, in terms of where we're going to go with this conference this weekend. Be interesting to know what is your purpose, what is your goal in studying this, and what are you trying to accomplish when you engage a believer or a non-believer. We have some believers here in terms of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Given the fact that it's now 12 o'clock, we'd like to take a break for 15 minutes. It'll give us a chance to think about a few questions. These people will all be here, and Michael. Richard Dawkins is here. We'll probably get some food, and we'll then be refreshed. And we'll probably have something to say about what Michael said. And Neil Tyson is here as well. We'll have something to say also. So could we come back in at about 12:20?